I'm Rakhi, representing voices from the periphery, and it's both a privilege and an honor to extend a warm welcome to you all for today's enlightening lecture on From Source to Solution: Water's Role in Building Peace. We are truly privileged to be joined today by an eminent scholar, Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha. Dr. Sinha is one of India's foremost experts in the fields of transboundary water politics, climate change, and strategic environmental policy. At the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, New Delhi, he heads the Non-Traditional Security Center and also serves as the managing editor of strategic analysis. The flagship and alumnus of Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Sinha began his professional journey in journalism before evolving into a distinguished career in research and policy. His scholarly contribution demonstrate a sustained engagement with the environmental and geopolitical challenges confronting South Asia and beyond. His widely active new book, Indus Basin Interrupted: History of Territory and Politics from Alexander to Nehru, provides a comprehensive historical account of the Indus region's complex territorial and water politics. Riverine Neighbourhood: Hydropolitics in South Asia offers an interesting analysis of strategic implications of river sharing among South Asian nations. In climate change narrative, reading the Arctic, it is the lens to the global north, reflecting on the geopolitics of a rapidly changed Arctic. His most recent co-edited volume, BBIN Sub-region: Perspective on Climate-water-energy Nexus, presents perspective on climate resilience, energy cooperation, and water diplomacy within Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. Up to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your introduction. I do not know how clear I am in terms of the audio, but I hope you can generally understand me. Right. So the topic today is about water. Water as an important natural resource. Water which has no substitute. Water which we generally tend to misrepresent because we do not really understand the real value of what water is. These days, you could all notice that water is playing a very central role, a critical role in various issues in terms of development, in terms of agricultural production, in terms of power production, and also in terms of relationship between states. Because, when you look at the map of South Asia, you would see that the countries in South Asia are linked through rivers. They cross boundaries, and therefore there is what is called an interstate relationship on the rivers. So that also becomes an important part of the region's political security cooperative dialogue framework. Right? So water has lots of meaning. It has a multifaceted importance, and therefore there is a centrality of water in the overall development of a country. Water is also equivalent to life, because if you don't have water, and the water that I'm talking about is fresh water, not the sea water, not the salt water that you see. 71% of the planet is covered with water. It is what it's called the blue planet. But it's only 3% of the water that is potable, that is useful for life. the water that we drink, the water that is used for agriculture, that's only 3% of the entire waterscape of the earth. And out of that 3%, 2% is captured in the glaciers and the snow and the ice and the permafrost. So when you look at the Himalayas, you must look at the Himalayas now as a very important source of fresh water because of the glaciers, because of the snow, because of the ice, etc. And only 1% of the fresh water, 50% of that 1% is groundwater, which you can't see. Right? And that is an important source of fresh water because that is used for irrigation, that is used for agriculture. And the remaining 50% of the 1% is the water that we see, that is visible. You see the rivers, you see the ponds, you see the lakes. In Bengal, you have several water bodies. Sometimes each house has a little water body. These are your fresh water bodies, and these are critically important because these water sustains our life. Without these water, we cannot survive. There are certain things you must understand about what water is. Water, first of all, has no substitute. Right? You can find alternatives, you can find a substitute for everything in this world. But you cannot find a substitute for fresh water. Second, you cannot discover water, you cannot find water. We exactly know the amount of water that is available. You can discover oil, discover gold in a certain mine, but we know exactly the amount of water that exists on this earth. So we have to live with that quantity of water. Third thing you must know about water is that it is very unevenly distributed, the fresh water that is available. If you distribute water evenly throughout the world, there will be no shortage of water. But the challenge is that in some part of the world, sometime in some part of your own country, you find that there are more water available. There is floods happening. And in other part of the country, there is drought. So there is an uneven distribution of water. And in India, there is a very high uneven distribution of water. In places from where you are, largely West Bengal, in the northeast, there is a vast amount of water. But in various parts of the country, some parts of peninsular India, the western part of India in particular, there is less water. So there is an uneven distribution of water. And the fourth and the final point about water that you should know is that water shortage does not really exist. It is water management that is very important. How efficiently you use water, how not to waste water. So these are some of the facts that you must understand before you look at various issues of water that grapples us. Every year we celebrate what is called World Water Day, right? And that's celebrated on March 22nd. Every year we celebrate it as World Water Day. And there is a theme that is attached to World Water Day. Last year the theme was Water for Peace. Very interesting. Water for Peace. And this year, in 2025, the theme was Protect the Glaciers. As I mentioned, 2% of the fresh water available is captured in the glaciers, in the snow, in the ice, in the permafrost. And therefore, these regions, the mountainous regions around the world, where there are ice caps, where there are glaciers, become very important. Right? We need to protect these glaciers because the impact of climate change is melting these glaciers faster than we can actually consume that water. So the more you protect these glaciers, the more you protect your fresh water, the more you protect the rivers that flow from these glaciers. So the Himalaya mountains becomes very important because after the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, it has the maximum accumulation of glaciers in the world. And therefore, it is regarded as the third pole. After the South Pole, the North Pole, the third pole is the Himalaya because of the vast amount of glaciers. So it's very appropriate that the world thought about paying attention to the glaciers and the countries around the Himalayas, India and its neighborhood, China also, will have to pay considerable attention in safeguarding and protecting the glaciers of the Himalaya. Right? Let me talk more about the theme of water for peace. Why is water linked to peace? Simply because there's a lot of prediction and there are lots of facts that suggest that in the we'll have to grapple with shortage of water. Right? I had said earlier that there's nothing called shortage of water. Water needs to be managed more effectively and efficiently. Right? But even if you do manage water effectively and efficiently, there still will be some dearth of water. There will be some decrease in the availability of water. A, because of the population increase, which is quite natural. There is a demand-supply aspect, right, of water availability and water consumption. There is also the impact of climate change. You're finding as the temperature increases, there's a lot of impact on the water bodies. Lakes dry, streams shrink, etc. So all this is making this kind of a prediction that there will be shortage of water. And when there is shortage of water, there will be conflict, there will be violence, and possible that states might even fight over water. Therefore, you must have heard a lot of these predictions of the 21st century that says that the 21st century war will be over water. In the 20th century, the war was over oil, in the 70s, and the 80s in particular. But in the 21st century, it will be fought over water. Now, this is something not very pleasant to hear when you say that they'll be fighting over water. Water is the most fundamental, basic natural resource. Everyone needs water. From the poorest to the richest, everyone needs water. And therefore, this theme of water for peace becomes very critical. Linking water and peace becomes important in understanding the relationship between peace and violence. Both are very important in today's world. And we have seen that throughout history, the pursuit of peace has been a recurring aspiration. Everyone wants peace. Whenever there is war, whenever there is difficulties, our end aspiration is always to search for peace, always to find a settlement. Because we want the world to continue. We want human life to survive. And that has always been the long-term objectives of states and societies. Therefore, when we talk about water for peace, we are in effect talking about managing water far more effectively than we have in the past. We are talking about sharing water in more efficient ways than we have done in the past. And this involves not just the states or between the states, it also involves a wider stakeholder, a wider community participation, from the local to the district to the provincial to the national, and then to the regional. So the level of engagement is wider when we talk about water for peace. It also becomes very interdisciplinary because you cannot really isolate water as just an existential resource. It is no doubt an existential resource because it does not have a substitute. You cannot invent a substitute of water. So it becomes very interdisciplinary because it touches various aspects and various sectors right? It touches the economy of a country. It touches the health sector of the country because you need clean water. If you don't have clean water, you will have health issues. It touches the manufacturing sector. It touches your electricity and energy sector. So water has a wider connotation, and it has to be studied and examined from a very interdisciplinary approach. And it has a political dimension, it has a social dynamic, it has economic relationship, and there is also the concern of the environment. Because if you do not protect the environment, if you do not have a healthy ecosystem, then you do not have a healthy water supply. So there is this linkages, there is this interconnections that water has, and therefore there is a very interdisciplinary aspect of water that we need to understand. So therefore, to me, water really becomes, as the saying French, piece de resistance, in its endeavor, and it becomes, evident that water cannot be understood in isolation from a variety of contextual issues. Facts are very important today. And when you look at the facts, it does not deceive you. Right? We know that today about 2 billion people worldwide lack access to safe drinking water. Now we talk about so much of development, so much of progress. We are thinking about going to the Mars. At one level, there is great scientific progress, but at another level, 2 billion people worldwide lack access to safe drinking water. Makes us really think as to the kind of disparity that exists, the kind of differences that exist in this world. Right? At one level, we are making enormous technological breakthroughs, and at another level, the very existential aspect of water is troubling 2 billion people. They can't even have drinking water. And not too far, 2030, 150 million people a year would be affected by floods and droughts. Right? So, and which will have, of course, serious repercussions on livelihoods and economies. Right? So we have to be very clear. What kind of progress are we thinking about? What is the format of our development? Is development an overall development, or is development just pocket-related development? And when you look at these facts related to water, you find that there are enormous challenges that one will have to face and one will need to resolve and solve. 80% of our jobs, you must know, as the youth, you must know that 80% of our jobs are actually water dependent. If you don't have water available, your manufacturing sector will decrease, and therefore a lot of jobs will fall on the wayside. And so all this sort of underscores the importance of sustainable water management and conservation efforts. And these become a very important aspect to ensure socio-economic stability. If you have poor quality water, if you have less availability of water, you will not have socio-economic stability. So I think that understanding of water and its linkages to various sectors become critically important. Not just the economic sector, but I think the health sector too requires a complete re-examination. And when you look at facts again, it is quite frightening because about 500,000 children, that's about 5 lakh children, under 5 years of age, die annually due to diarrhea, right, resulting from inadequate water, sanitation, hygiene. And these statistics are sometimes are indeed very sobering, because it wakes us up, and it makes us realize that there are fundamental things that still needs to be looked at, and there are challenges which we cannot avoid and which we must deal with effectively. So this is the broad base of facts that I thought I would let you know. But it is also beyond just economic utility. Water also holds social, cultural, and ecological value. And that's another feature of water that we must understand, because searching for solutions around water requires a very holistic outlook, as I said. It requires a very interdisciplinary and ministerial approach. It requires an all-government approach, not just one particular ministry, but the entire governmental approach. So we see these values emerging from time to time. The most important aspect of this is that everyone needs an equitable access to water. Everyone should have a certain amount of water, because that sustains your life. And if you have equitable access to water, you also reduce chances of conflict, chances of tension, right? So in international politics, between states, and also between provinces in a country, equitable access of water is a very important thing. And it helps you really to moderate the tensions that will emerge in the future. And it helps you to develop and build peace around water issues. Now, how does water and peace relate to each other? Sometimes we cannot always talk in the abstract. There has to be both a conceptual and a functional dimension of the relationship between water for peace. And the important aspect is that at the end of the day, when you develop this conceptual and functional dimension of water, at the end of the day, you are also looking at water policies. You're looking at policies that really will help tackle the challenges throughout the country. Now, the first dimension of water for peace, and those who have studied the dynamics of peace and conflict would realize that peace does not, peace has to come from peaceful means. Right? Peace cannot be thrust upon. Sometimes you force someone to negotiate. Sometimes you force a party to have signed a treaty. Peace does not really last. Peace only comes, or lasting peace comes only through peaceful means. Now take an example of water. As I said, water has multiple users and usage, and it leads to layered competitions and tensions. Even the word rivalry, if you look at the genesis of this word, it comes from the word rivalis, which is a Latin word, which means persons using the stream as another. That means there is one stream and there are many persons using the water of the stream. So you have rivalry over water. And that's how the word rivalry comes from, rivalis. There's a phrase, I do not know whether you know, there's a phrase called to sell someone down the river. It means to betray someone. Now, even these words and the way they have originated quite clearly suggests that water can help build cooperation, can help build friendship, but water can also lead to rivalry, can create tensions and bad blood, and create enemy-like situation. And therefore, the more we talk about water for peace, is basically to reduce the kind of tensions that might emerge between countries or even between societies and between provincial states over water. Now, what do you see today in our country and in the region? You do get a sense that water is highly political, highly divisive, and very emotional. We see tensions within the country between Haryana and Punjab over water distribution. We have seen historically tensions between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Right? So there are existing facts and examples that suggest that water is highly political, divisive, and emotional between states within a country. It is also very conflictual between states. For example, India and Pakistan. For example, India and Bangladesh. For example, India and China. And there are always growing tensions and misreadings and misgivings between the rivers that flow from Nepal into India and the rivers that come from Bhutan to India. But you'll be surprised to know that despite this tensions that we talk about, you'll be surprised to know that water issues between states has seen far more cooperation. They have seen far more agreements and treaties than actual conflict. Right? The only recorded war on water, that means water directly related to war, is almost 4000 BC, when the two city-states of Mesopotamia fought directly over the supply of water. Since then, water is seen as an important catalyst, maybe, that might create tensions and lead to war. But there's no direct correlation between water and conflict these days. There are far more treaties that have been signed between states on water, so that has able to keep tensions low. Even Palestinians and Israel and Syria have water arrangement despite the political tension. India and Pakistan is a very classic example that despite animosity, despite the wars, 65 and 71, despite cross-border terrorism, we still have the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. And in Bangladesh, we have another treaty called the Ganga Treaty. We have several water arrangements with Nepal. We have a number of memorandum of understanding with Bhutan on water development and water cooperation, especially hydroelectricity. So it's an interesting question to ask as students, that does water lead to war? Or does water initiate cooperation? Right? And I think then you will find that water has been able to initiate cooperation. It might not bring total peace around it, but it does bring some semblance of peace and cooperation and prosperity. So this is one aspect where you need to really understand the relationship in international politics. What does water do to state relationship? Also, you must understand the role of leadership when it comes to water for peace. And there are some fascinating examples that you must look at. Historically, I think the best example to look at is the role of Buddha, who actually mediated a dispute over the waters of the Rohini River. The Rohini River is a river that comes from Nepal to India. Of course, we're talking about the Buddha's time. So on the Rohini River, there were two clans, the Sakhas and the Koliyas. They were the two clans who resided on the river Rohini. And they were fighting over the waters of this river. Both of them wanted a larger share of the water. As I said, rivalry over the river. And Buddha, during that time, actually mediated between these two clans and tried to resolve the issue. And therefore, I think classically, this is probably regarded as the first mediation, Buddha's mediation on the water that is disputed between two clans. And it's a good study. It's recorded. It's not a myth. It's not fictitious. If you read Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, his last book, the Buddha and his Dhamma, he writes about this incident, about the dialogue between Buddha and the Senapati of the Sakya clan. And Ambedkar narrates it very beautifully in his book. And the role that Buddha played, of course, he was not Buddha. He was then Siddhartha Gautama. He was only enlightened after he left his family. But that element of mediation and peace on the river is very important in terms of the study, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of understanding Buddha's approach to mediation. That's a very good example when one wants to look at leadership role on river disputes. Right? If I were to look around, I would say John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States. Of course, he was there for a very short term because he was assassinated. But he once said, anyone who can solve the problems of water will be worthy of 2 Nobel Prizes, one for peace and one for science. And perhaps in the future, who knows, there might even be a Nobel Prize for water, because given the criticality of water, given its importance, I think one will be searching for a lot of solutions to water. So I think Kennedy's words are very true even today. Water issues span various disciplines, as I said, and perspectives. For some, it is a matter of morality, recognizing access to clean water as a fundamental human right, for example. The former Soviet president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, for example, and we know him because of glasnost, policy of openness and perestroika, restructuring the societal and political aspects in the country. He made a very important speech in 2009 in the European Parliament. And he was emphasizing the very important integral role of addressing water issues in global environmental strategy. So if you have an environmental approach to the issue, then you have to bring water into the center of attention. So these aspects are quite useful for us. You can study more political leaders and their thought process. A good example, again, to look at water and its relation to economic activities, President Franklin Roosevelt, who in the time of the Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, if you look at the history of the United States, he used water and river basin development and pulled the US out of that Great Depression. He generated employment and he used water and the rivers in terms of transports of goods, navigation utility. And he started building a lot of navigation and facilities and helped to develop what is called the economic development after that Great Depression. Jawaharlal Nehru is a great case again. Soon after India's independence, he focused a lot on building dams. Right? India's early phase of development was conceived primarily with kind of supply side of water, and he addressed India's development through hydraulic engineering, and that was also very important. You will know that Nehru, he was very enthusiastic about big dams. He would always say, the dams are the temples of the new age and a symbol of a nation's will. Right? And he commemorated several big dams, the Nangal Dam, the Hirakud Dam in the 50s. So, of course, he realized much later, not much later, but a few years later, that big is necessarily not good. Gigantism has its problem, he realized. And therefore, the value of smaller schemes and public cooperation became an important road of development progress in India. So that again, Nehru's thoughts and Nehru's understanding of water development or water in the development process is also a good study, I think. If you look at Singapore, for example, Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, a city-state. Of course, he was prime minister for 30 plus years. And he would always travel the city-state and look around. And he was quite a visionary because he would say, one of the things that would sustain Singapore as a city is the availability of water. Singapore really did not have its own independent source of water. It had to rely upon water sources traveling from outside its territory. And he was quite worried as to what will happen to Singapore in the future, and that Singapore needs to be water secure. And he would pose a challenge to his engineers, and he would ask the question, suppose we could capture every drop of rain in Singapore. Could we be self-sufficient? That's a very famous line of Lee, very famous line of Lee Kuan Yew asking his engineers. And Singapore today is not the Singapore of 50 years ago. It's this bustling city, and it's a very sustainable city. And there's no dearth of water because even living with less water, they are efficiently managing it. They are recycling and reusing, and they're using technology. And therefore, as I said, there is no dearth of water. What is required is proper management and an efficient way of utilizing water, right? So Singapore is a good example for you all to have a look at. Again, one of our powerful leaders in India, Indira Gandhi. People would go to Indira Gandhi and say the difficulties of water issues, etc. And she would say, well, for me, as she writes, is that water has to have a certain economic end. If water is used for economic growth, she's happy with it. If it helps to generate employment, water for her therefore becomes important. If it gives better quality of life for Indians, water then becomes valuable to her. So she had a very important understanding of water, a very different approach, I would say, that the ends and the means. Right? Water was a means to an end. And that was her overall political philosophy when you looked at water. Prime Minister Modi, I think, has a very important take on water. If you look at his Man Ki Baat, which he speaks to the nation every month, I think he has used the theme water on several occasions. He, the Prime Minister, sees water as an influencer, as an enabler in the overall benefit of the country. So, at its core are the values of governance, scientific detailing, technological development, and rationality of inclusive economic growth. And this is how he looks at water, the core values of water, and what it gives, the values of governance, scientific detailing, technological development, and most important, inclusive economic growth. But one leader that has really, in my own study, that has really made me, that has surprised me, but also helped me in understanding how water can be used as an important tool for political power, is the Chinese leader Mao Zedong. And he actually, uh, his understanding of water that is that man must conquer nature, which means that man should have total control over water or the rivers or the ponds. Right? That was his overall philosophy. And in the 50s, he built a hydraulic society with control of water supply for irrigation as the basis of Chinese mode of production. And that created a very powerful exploitative bureaucracy. So the Chinese leadership, the Chinese bureaucracy, the Chinese system, through the rivers, could actually control the fate of the millions of people. And even today, the Chinese leadership is notoriously known to mix compliance with intimidation. Those who read Antonio Gramsci, you realize the understanding of a mix of force and consent. So that's how the Chinese system was in the 50s and 60s. PRC was created. It had to build a society through a mix of force and a mix of consent. Right? So, and rivers were really and truly used for that fashion in China. So, what can be done? This is my final part because I've already spoken for 40 minutes. What can be done to bring water peace closer? And this is a challenge, not only at the policy level, but I think for students, this must be an important question to deal with. What can be done to bring water peace closer? Which means that we have to ensure that water does not become conflict, that water does not become a source of tension between states. What must be done? And some of my suggestions, I think, that you can delve upon is first and foremost, we need to address water-related challenges through education and awareness. That is an important initiative at the policy level, and I am at the policy level, being where I am in New Delhi, and I work quite closely with the government. I think education and awareness is fundamentally the most important thing because we really do not truly understand what water is. We are quite ignorant. We generally feel that there is enough water, that there is plenty of water, that it is God sent. We do not realize that water can be scarce, can become non-available, that access to water can become difficult. And therefore, that education, that awareness at the level, various levels, becomes very important. Establishing a global education network, uh, understanding each part of the world and how it relates to water, also will be very helpful. Learning through examples. How do other countries in the world deal with water issues? Sometimes there might be just plenty of water around you. You do not know what to do with it. For example, floods. And then there are countries who face recurring droughts. So a global network, education network of understanding how countries, society deal with water challenges is certainly very beneficial. One of the things we need to also understand, and we tend to ignore, probably because we don't know, is the hydrological cycle of the water cycle. And this, I think, necessitates a kind of a universal common good, if I may put it that way, which kind of transcends the cultural and national borders. What does this hydrological cycle or the water cycle mean? It encompasses all processes through which water moves between the Earth's surface and the atmosphere, right? Manifesting as precipitation. Now, it is very elegantly simple. We all know that there is this hydrological cycle, that the temperature lifts the water up, and there is precipitation, which comes as rain. That maintains the cycle, and when that cycle is disrupted, then obviously there is a challenge to water issues. That is very simple, elegantly simple. However, the realization of such a network remains, I think, in its infancy. It requires a global consensus, that it must be a global commons. And this sometimes probably raises concerns about sovereignty and accountability. But this is something that we need to really emphasize upon, that countries around the world should maintain this hydrological cycle. And those who do not, well, we have to then find ways to either create remedies, solutions to it, or take punitive actions until we destroy this cycle, which obviously means that you have to maintain the ecosystem around your water hydrological cycle. For example, if you cut trees, then your hydrological cycle will get disrupted. So it links to an effective understanding of how you deal with water issues. You have to commit yourself to maintain the ecosystem around it. It's a very effective way, and it requires a consensus. It requires something called a global commons. If this is treated as a global commons, then there might be a global action towards it. The third point I think we need to also emphasize is the establishment of a global information system. It's very imperative, and at various levels, from the local to the national to the regional, effective information systems about the strength of your water, the state of the water bodies, in terms of quantity, in terms of supply, in terms of distribution. This global information system would be fundamentally important for us to be prepared in dealing with the crisis in the future, prepared to deal with the issue. The more informed we are, the better we can be prepared, right? But the issue here is, when you share information, can you trust that information? Can you trust the person which is sharing that information? Now, sometimes we can trust within our country because it is our country. We can trust an independent scientific body. But trust becomes difficult when it is between states. Pakistan never trusts India when we send them information on water resources. Sometimes we doubt when China sends us information of the government threat. So trust, I think, is a cornerstone of peace. And that can only come through transparent knowledge. Information cannot be secretive, because if it is secretive, it creates elements of doubt, and there can be no trust. Trust comes through transparent knowledge, and it helps in building peace. My last point, I think, before I end, is to understand that there is great potential for cooperation in water. I know water can easily lead to tension and conflict because there are chances that you can misread water issues, can be misinformed in water issues. But I think there is a great potential for cooperation on water between states. And we need to focus on those elements of cooperation. And here, the example of our own region becomes very critical. South Asia is a very vulnerable region in terms of the impact of climate change. In terms of poverty, there's a huge number of people who are still struggling for their livelihood. There are, of course, historical and political tensions in the region. There are rivers, as I said, that crisscross borders. So it seems, on the first impression, that water is like a powder keg in the region. It can easily ignite into severe tensions, possible uh, conflict, maybe war. But I think we've done remarkably well since 1947, when the subcontinent was partitioned, and remarkably well. And India has been quite central in framing its diplomacy through the rivers. We have done it bilaterally most of the time. Rivers between India and Pakistan, between India and Nepal, between India and Bangladesh, between India and Bhutan. So it's very bilateral. We've kept rivers not from a regional perspective, but bilaterally because it's easier to deal with. As I said, since water is very emotive, it is easier to deal with emotions when it is just one country. But now, maybe after several decades, it is time maybe to rethink about what kind of cooperation we require on the rivers in South Asia. Uh, Bilateral, yes, it's important because the rivers that we have are in some sense a bilateral arrangement, but I think it also requires a multilateral participation because, take for example, the Ganga. It comes through the plains and into Bangladesh. Many of the tributaries that join the Ganga come from Nepal. So now I think there is a multi-level, multi-party basin approach that can be thought. Where Nepal, India, and Bangladesh together can come and look at the benefits of cooperation into this. We can also bring in Bhutan to the frame. And I think therefore the sub-regional aspect, we look at the region as South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan at one end, and Myanmar at another end. But the most functional aspect of this region is the sub-regional concept, like the BBIN, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. So rivers will play a very important role there. And that will be what is called the potential for cooperation. We would all need electricity more and more in the future. Rivers can be turned into hydroelectricity production. We need water for irrigation because this is your breadbasket area, plains of the Ganga. This is the most densely populated part of the world. So there is a food and water connect as well. Right? And then there is the new way of looking at rivers, and that is inland navigation, which is a very low carbon footprint. You do trade through these rivers, that becomes very valuable. So there is a huge potential for future cooperation in the rivers between Bangladesh and Nepal. And I said Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Bhutan. But when we talk about all these things, this is my final point, that there has to be a very strong environmental consideration. Water is a mediated resource because it is extracted from the ecosystem and it necessitates consideration of environmental flow, right? Ensuring that the ecosystem receives adequate water to sustain their health and function. So while we use water for development, while we use water for agriculture, while we use water for hydroelectricity production, we need to use some water, or we need to give some water for the protection of the ecosystem, the environmental flow. Because if you don't maintain that ecosystem, you cannot maintain your water resource. It is a mediated resource. And there's a very interesting book by D. Denver. It's called The Dharma in DNA. And the lines are as follows. I'll just sort of read it out. The rain became the tree. Water molecules in the air condensed into droplets falling onto the heart-shaped leaves. The tree became the rain. I said, the rain became the tree, now the tree became the rain. The water entered the roots and then coursed through the circulatory vessels in the tree, up and away from the roots hidden underground. So this, I think, is to me the most wonderful expression of water as a circulated resource, as a mediated resource. The more we protect that mediation, the better we will be able to deal with water issues. So thank you very much, students, friends. I hope I've managed to say what I wanted to say.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your wonderful lecture. And now I am asking our audience who are in the Gmeet and on Facebook, if they have any questions, they can ask sir in Gmeet. They can unmute themselves and ask, or they can also write in the chat box, and I will ask those questions to sir.
Okay, if you'd like to ask some questions, you may please go ahead. Though I do
Sir,
not know how effectively I will be able to answer them. Nonetheless, yes.
yes. Sir, we have one question on Facebook. Can I ask it, sir?
Yes. Okay, let me see the question. All right. Can I see the question?
No, no, sir. We have one question on Facebook. Can I ask it?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Okay, sir. Sir, one question from Shayantan Sarkar. In conflict zone where state and non-state actors both
Hmm.
claim authority, how can water diplomacy prioritize peace when powerful corporate political lobbies privatize water access, systematically excluding marginalized communities from both negotiation and supply?
I somehow could not fully understand because the voice was breaking. But I've got the sense of the questions you're talking about the marginalized community and their participation in the larger efforts to uh, have a water secure zone. Is that what the whole issue is? How can diplomacy play a role? Okay.
Sir, can I write it in the chat?
Okay.
Sir, am I audible?
Ah, please put it. Let me see if I can see. Can I see the chat box? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. In conflict zones where state and non-state actors both claim authority, how can water diplomacy prioritize peace when powerful corporate or political lobbies privatize water access, systematically excluding marginalized communities from both negotiation and supply? A very good question, and very difficult really to answer because see, for any negotiation, water or otherwise, you have to have a favorable environment around it. You have to have at least some peace around to have negotiation to follow. In a conflict situation, everything is bizarre. Everything becomes difficult to handle and difficult to manage. Sometimes your most basic and existential issues are completely overlooked at times of conflict because the dynamics of conflict at that point of time is essentially uh, to win that particular uh, aspect. It could be a political ideology, it could be a territorial dispute. So the entire focus, the state machinery, it's very inclined towards victory, uh, victory over territory, victory over resources. So therefore, obviously, you will find these existential issues, lives of people, water resources, health issues. They are very, very peripheral at that point of time. The challenge becomes when conflict ends or when there is a truce. That is the time when I think water becomes an important peacemaker. Because, as I said, water is related to several issues. In a post conflict situation, when the conflict has subsided, when there is a truce or where there is some negotiation happening, at post conflict period, water has to be used very, very carefully and also very effectively. And that is the time when I think the marginalized communities, those who have been excluded and those who have suffered from the conflict, need to be involved. And I think they should therefore be the first people to receive the adequate attention that is required. So I think water becomes very critical in the post-conflict situation, uh, both from the health point of view, yes, from the health point of view, and also from peace point of view as well. The second question is cooperation among Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and why not China? Well, good questions. And I think Brahmaputra is an important part of that. Uh, we want a more stable kind of cooperation on the Brahmaputra with China, but it requires two to have cooperation. China does not at this stage want any treaty on the Brahmaputra. They are more in favor of the continuation of the memorandum of understanding, the 5-year memorandum of understanding that we have sharing information on the Brahmaputra, which started in 2002. And this MOU on the Brahmaputra gets renewed after every 5 years. So while we are sort of pushing for a permanent treaty on the Brahmaputra, the Chinese are not very favorable to having one. So there is a bit of an issue on that front. However, and you should probably now know that China is planning a very big project on the Brahmaputra, a mega dam, as it is called. And there's a lot of concern in the northeast, in particular, Arunachal Pradesh and Assam, where the Brahmaputra flows. And I've been involved at various levels in dealing with this issue, also talking in the public about the Brahmaputra River. And my take is quite simple, that I think we should not be over worried about what the Chinese are doing. Of course, we need to be concerned, but I don't think we should be overly worried simply because we can't really stop the Chinese from doing what they are doing. They are doing things on their side of the territory. So that's the reality we must understand. China is an upper riparian country. We are a lower riparian country. We will always receive water from China. Just like Pakistan receives water from us, just like Bangladesh receives water from India, we receive water from China. It is a different equation now. But we have enough water on our side, on the Brahmaputra, as it is joined by various tributaries, the Siang, the Tiban, the Lohit, and then becomes the Brahmaputra. There's plenty of water, and we need to manage those water very carefully. We need to build our own structures, dams, so that we can store the water. Suppose if China releases a lot of water, we should have the capacity to store that water. And therefore, we need those kind of dams, big dams, to store that water. So we need to build our own capacity and capability first and foremost. Of course, in the dialogue process with China, we should continuously insist that we need a more permanent kind of a treaty, and we need more transparency on the data. There is hydrological data which the Chinese are giving us, but we do not know the variability of that data. Right? It could be some false data. We can only trust that it is true but we need to also verify those systems. We also need to build our own verification data. Sometimes satellite monitoring may be helpful, and more data stations on the river that might read the changing flows of the Brahmaputra. So we need to do a lot on our side, so that we can mitigate the kind of threat or the kind of challenges that might come from China and the Brahmaputra. There's another question. How can transboundary water sharing agreements be genuinely equitable when upstream nations weaponize water control as leverage over politically weaker downstream countries, especially in the region with a history of... Yes, correct. I think there is a tendency of upper riparian countries to use, to leverage the rivers, to use it as an instrument of coercion, as you can say. You can use the rivers to coerce your downstream country. China is a good example in some ways, that it coerces its southeastern countries on the Mekong. A lot of people ask this question, that India does the same with Pakistan. You have to study that a bit. You may have your own conclusion on it. Yes, from time to time, if you want to do it, you can, given the political situation. And we do not have a very healthy political equation with Pakistan. Rivers can be used to some extent. Look, rivers are not like taps that you can just close it or shut it or open it. The rivers are a natural sort of part of the Earth system. It's not easy to stop the flow, turn around the river, and do things like that. It's not a playground, and it's not a childlike thing to do. But yes, when you have structures on the rivers, like dams, for example, then you can use stop the flow or allow more water to flow. These are coercive instruments in some sense. Dams can be coercive instruments. But India has a treaty with Pakistan. And the treaty quite clearly mentions the nature of the dam. And the dam has to be run of the river. That means you generate electricity, but you allow the water to flow. There are provisions and restrictions in the treaty that binds the upper riparian country like India to do anything that might harm a lower riparian country. So I think for India, because we signed on this treaty, we knew very well the restrictions that we have. And therefore we signed it. Therefore our intentions have never been really to use rivers as a coercive instrument in our dealing with our neighborhood countries. And that goes same with Bangladesh. A lot of people argue today that India should actually be doing it. But I think our foreign policy and our regional diplomacy orientation is very different, unlike the Chinese orientation. So we need to understand that, the value of water relationship between India and Pakistan, or India and Nepal, India, Bhutan, and India, Bangladesh. It's something that we've not done, the study, deeper study. But I think the core value of rivers in our regional diplomacy is that there should be peace, stability, and prosperity. Because if you're going to fight over waters, there's going to be no larger development in the region. And since 1947, the biggest challenge has been to develop, overall development is the most important factor. Wars, conflicts, and tensions only thwart your development. And our leadership has been trained to think in terms of creating channels of peace. Because if you do not have peace, you cannot have development. And for that, therefore, river treaties have been signed precisely to maintain peace and stability and create more prosperity. So these are the three questions. And I think, yeah, good.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you again for your wonderful lecture and
So those who are really interested in looking at water issues, you may like to search for my book on Amazon called Indus Basin Uninterrupted. It's the political story, the political and historical story from Alexander to Nehru, and it's available, published by Penguin in 2021, marking 60 years of the Indus Waters Treaty. So it's a historical account. You may like it. It talks about the partition and the long history starting from the Indus Valley civilization. And then there is a book which is coming out a few months later, marking 65 years of the Indus Waters Treaty, and that is again published by Penguin Random House. It's called Ebbs and Flow: Indus Waters Treaty in India-Pakistan Relations. So it covers 65 years of the political relationship between India and Pakistan on the river Indus. Right. So these are some books you may like to glance, read. Right. Sorry, I'm doing self-propaganda.
No, sir, we will definitely looking into these books, sir, because one of us have much interest in this topic, so we will definitely looking into these topics.
Yeah, and I also focus a lot on the Brahmaputra. So those who have asked the question on the Brahmaputra can look into my talks, quite available. I was recently in Guwahati. I'm traveling again next week to Itanagar to meet the engineers there. So we can have a look at that as well. Right.
Thank you, sir, once again. So today we'll end the session. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Right. All the best. I look forward and keep in touch through Facebook or LinkedIn, whatever it's called. And any help you require in terms of literature, in terms of comments, in terms of me connecting you to other experts, do send me a note, a line or two on my email.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for kind help.
And if you like to use WhatsApp, you can send on this number, which I'm just going to write down so that you can instantly stay in touch.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Did you get my number?
Yes, sir.
On the message.
Yes.
Righto, thank you, and it was lovely interacting.
Thank you, sir, for joining us. Thank you once again.
Bye-bye.
thank you, sir.
Bye.